My name is Matthew Reese, and I am here in Charlotte, North Carolina with the 2012 Libertarian nominee for President of the United States, former New Mexico Governor Gary Johnson. Governor Johnson, thank you for joining me.
Matthew, you bet. Thank you.
When you were Governor of New Mexico, 750 vetoes, thousands of line item vetoes, but 2 of those were overturned. Tell me about the 2 that got away.
One was just, I can't even tell you what it was. It had to do with establishing bed quotas for Medicaid facilities delivering Medicaid services. Really, it was a Republican bill, and I think more than anything, it was just to show me that they could override a veto. Well, I didn't learn anything from that lesson. And then the last veto was actually the budget of my final year, where Republicans came to me and said, look, you're going to be out of office. You're not going to have to deal with these problems we are, so we're going to override your veto because you're not going to have to deal with it. Well, I don't ascribe to that philosophy, but that's what happened.
Okay. Speaking of the line item veto, the President does not have that power. Would you seek that power, and if so, how do you go about getting it?
Well, I would, but I wouldn't count on getting it. I don't think there's any reason that Congress is going to give me that power, given my propensity to veto. So I would just be vetoing whole pieces of legislation. If legislation does have earmarks in it, I'll just veto the legislation and I'll let Congress override.
To follow that, if you're elected president, do you foresee a potential problem in that Democrats and Republicans in Congress might choose not to work with you on anything because you're not one of them?
You know, I view it the other way around. I view it as a real opportunity to challenge Democrats to get better on civil liberties. Repeal the Patriot Act. I mean, should have never sent the National Defense Authorization Act in the first place with the provision that you and I could be detained without being charged. Let's get out of Afghanistan. Let's bring about marriage equality. Let's end the drug wars. That's to Democrats. Challenge the Democrats. Republicans. I'm going to challenge Republicans on spending. They all spend too much. Out of our national debt, $8.5 billion of our national debt is caused by Democrat administrations. $7.5 of it's caused by Republican administrations. Who's worse on spending? Democrats, but not by much.
Your budget calls for the elimination of 43% of federal spending. Why that specific amount instead of less or more?
Well, 43% represents the $1.4 trillion deficits that we currently have. So that's the amount of money that we're currently printing and borrowing to cover our needs. So $1.4 trillion reduction in federal spending balances the federal budget.
Without a tax increase.
Without a tax increase.
Mitt Romney has said that cutting the federal budget by $1 trillion would cause a recession or depression. This is an example of the broken window fallacy that Frederick Bastiat described. Could you point out some other economic fallacies that you believe Obama and Romney are committing?
Well, Obama gets on television the other day and he gives us a little bit of a lecture about Europe and the fact that European countries that spend more money than what they take in are in trouble, but European countries that live within their means are doing pretty well. So Europe's a mixed bag. But the United States, he goes on to say, we have some real difficulties in the municipalities and in the states because federal money has dried up, and so they've had to lay off firefighters, teachers, and policemen. Well, the municipalities in the states don't have the tools at their availability that we do, and so we need to help them. Well, that's code for borrowing and printing money. That's code for spending more money than what you're taking in. Exactly opposite of what he had said just minutes earlier regarding Europe. Romney says it's important to balance the federal budget, but that we should increase spending on military and that we should hold Medicare in check. Well, I graduated from the second grade, and the mathematics that went along with the second grade education, it doesn't add up. It just doesn't add up. So I want to point out that what we need to have is mutual sacrifice here by all of us. And if we don't do it, we're going to find ourselves with nothing. And I'm afraid that we're going to find ourselves with nothing because of not dealing with these issues now. And it'll never be easier to deal with these issues than now. Is it going to be difficult? Is it going to have mutual sacrifice? Yes, but never easier than tomorrow. Never easier than tomorrow.
President Obama recently said in a speech, if you've been successful, you didn't get there on your own. And if you've got a business, you didn't build that. Somebody else made that happen. As someone who has built a business from the ground up, how do you respond to that?
Well, this is just somebody speaking who has no concept of what it is to start and grow a business. Having started and grown my one-man handyman business to 1,000 employees, I was the glue. I was the glue, just plain and simple. And it involved a lot of really wonderful, hard-working, dedicated people who... So back to Obama's statement, in that context, no, I could have never made it without those hard-working, dedicated, committed people, but I was the glue. They wouldn't have been in the unit if it wasn't for me. So really, overall, it's just a statement that's just a complete disconnect from reality.
You're on record as a supporter of a balanced budget amendment to the U.S. Constitution, but every state except Vermont has such a provision in their state constitutions, and many of them just ignore it. So might that be a waste of time?
Well, the trouble with a balanced budget amendment, and so I'm not espousing a balanced budget amendment, because what I see with a balanced budget amendment is just kicking the can down the road. We'll pass a balanced budget amendment for 12 years from now, and here's what has to happen. Well, nobody wants to pass a balanced budget that's going to happen 2 years from now. And I want to be on record as saying I support a balanced budget next year. That's what we should be embracing. Really, kick the can down the road. Don't ever deal with it. We're gonna find ourselves in the midst of a bond market collapse. And by the way, it will be a bond market collapse that causes all of this. And that's not going to be anything that the government is going to announce. 2 weeks from Thursday, there will be a monetary collapse, so go take all the money that you have and spend it all, because 2 weeks from Thursday, it won't be worth a thing. They don't do that. It just happens, and our money isn't worth anything.
Do you see that arising out of some of the towns and cities, like in California, that are now declaring they are bankrupt?
Well, their inability, they're going to have to deal with these issues because of balanced budgets. And I will just say that states have balanced budget amendments, but what happens with states is they always underappropriate, they always underestimate for Medicaid, and then they end up with problems that they push down the road. In New Mexico, that was something that I recognized very early on after my first year in office. And so all those vetoes, more than anything, had to do with freeing up money that was going to have to go to pay for Medicaid, an entitlement with no cap that wasn't going to have to come back in and raise taxes, or wasn't going to have to come back in some sort of an emergency kind of a situation. I took the emergency out of funding.
You have said that we should audit the Federal Reserve and curtail many of its activities. Do you think it would be bad to end the Fed immediately?
No, I would sign on to abolishing the Federal Reserve. If Congress passed a bill saying abolish the Federal Reserve, Gary Johnson's signature, President of the United States, abolish the Federal Reserve.
Okay. Part of your platform is rejecting the idea of bailouts. Do do you come at this more from an Austrian school anti-Keynesian perspective or a cost-benefit analysis?
Well, really, just from a free market perspective, that there's an unintended consequence to everything that government does. I think everybody right now is pointing at GM as a successful bailout. I would argue that we have a mechanism for failure, and that's bankruptcy. And that if GM would have entered, General Motors would have entered into bankruptcy, that maybe it would have emerged as 9 different car companies. Maybe it would have emerged as one car company, who's to say? But I dare say that today the company would be run drastically different. It was the equity holders and the debt holders were wiped out with General Motors, and now they're back as government motors, and I just think it's a reinflated dinosaur that's going to play. We're going to see this played out again.
On education, your platform includes reducing or eliminating federal involvement in education. To clarify, reduce or eliminate?
Eliminate. Every state receives about 11